Chapter 14. Master Joran swept his long hair over his shoulder.
As the name of the class implies, we are here to develop your constitutions and knowledge surrounding this special attribute. While you'll learn about intelligence and wisdom in Master Miswell's class, Constitution is the only attribute to receive dedicated focus in your first-year studies.
He raised a single finger.
And with good reason. Constitution equals hit points. Although it's obvious, I'll state here that when your hit points reach 0, you'll die.
Chuckles filled the room. Joran allowed a narrow smile and waved a hand.
But if we get all the obvious topics out of the way, we can start expanding your hungry minds. As magicians of the light, you might be called upon to heal offensive combatants. The vast majority of light casters are called to this purpose, and understanding how Constitution affects the people you protect serves everyone involved in a party. Imagine you're in a group of 4. You are a healer. The tank defending the party by gaining the ire of the enemy will sustain many injuries. You will heal those wounds. But what if you heal ineffectively? What if you overheal and find your mana pool depleted? Your tank dies. The enemy will then turn its attention to the person who most annoyed it while it battled your frontline fighter. Anyone want to guess who the target of its ire is likely to be?
The answer was so obvious not a single hand went up.
Right.
He extended one finger, stretched his arm across the table, then swept it in an arc across his body.
You.
He barked the words so loud and resounded through the room, and several people, including me, jerked. Then he slid off the stool and leaned his elbows on the table.
And when you die, I will have failed the mission I began when I walked through that door.
He thrust a thumb over his shoulder, then leaned even further across the long table.
And I, class, do not fail.
He let the words penetrate before he continued. In the interim, several gazes wandered, and I received more than a few nods from strangers. A door on the left opened. A young elf entered dragging a massive chest. He didn't call out, nor did the 2 elves acknowledge each other. After leaving his burden on the floor in front of the table, he departed. Master Joran waved a hand at the chest.
Starting from that side of the room, you will rise 1 row at a time and retrieve 1 top and 1 bottom from the chest. These will be the clothes you wear for the physical training we will undertake.
Johan rose, then Elrin. The rest of the row filed in behind them as Master Joran continued.
At birth, you receive 80 points in stamina and your hit point pool. The goddess deems we receive 8 of each when we receive a point of constitution. That constitution impacts 2 vital resource pools and justifies a class devoted to increasing the attribute. We aren't here to sit on our duffs and talk. In ages past, healers often weren't asked to focus on their physical training because they focused their energies on gaining high intellect. They received a point of constitution every level, then 2 points beginning at level 20. Many fell as a result. But through rigorous exercise, we will gain constitution points to increase our health pool and stamina so you don't meet the same fate, should you prove efficient enough to be called to serve. It's vital we perform various kinds of exercise to keep these earned points flowing. For instance, once you possess the constitution, and thereby stamina, to run 10 miles, each additional point of constitution earned by running will require more effort to earn. But if you drop down on your hands and do push-ups with regularity, you'll gain rewards with less effort. Then, the easier push-ups become, the less bonus stamina earned. Any questions?
No hands rose.
Fine. The council of this academy has adopted a millennia-old regimen of exercise routines that will optimize your stamina gains for a long time to come. In the early going, you will earn constitution points, but this becomes less frequent with each earned.
A young man with a shaved head raised one hand. When Master Joran called on him, he said,
If we're so focused on stamina, why call it a constitution class? Perhaps I was unclear. We will also engage in combat exercise in this class. In second semester, you will be grouped into parties, then venture out to combat low-level vermin to start your leveling process. With each level, you will receive constitution attribute increases. From those, you will receive stamina and hit points. The latter is vital if you want to survive a fight, but you could always use the former to run away and leave your party to die. We focus on both, so the attribute, and not the resource pools, is our primary focus.
The student nodded his understanding.
Where was I?
Not knowing what possessed me, I called out the answer. You were talking about an ancient exercise regimen. Joran Renard raised one finger.
Ah, right. Thank you.
He paced back toward his stool, but didn't sit.
Until now, no race outside the Queen's Forest has laid eyes upon this process. It is now my great honor to teach it to you. My people train every citizen of New Nin from an early age, and someday you might fight beside them. Since you don't enjoy the benefits of having started young, you have a lot of catching up to do if you plan to keep up.
The second row approached the chest while the first sat and folded the pants and shirts of thin fabric they'd gathered.
I'm sending each of you the requirements for this class, but one should stand out above all others. I have taken note of your current combat levels, and I will be apprised of each level you gain during your training. Any constitution points gained from advancement, including any spent as electives, will be subtracted from your semester total. In order to pass this class, you must gain a minimum of 48 stamina points by the end of the term.
The bald man's hand shot up again. Joran Renard shook his head.
Because the council deemed it is called Constitution class, put your hand down.
The hand dropped, as did the master's exasperation, evidenced by a return to his softer tone.
You will inevitably fail. You will cast one too many heals and find yourselves choking down a mana or health potion to accommodate. But beginning today, we will take to the fields out back, and we will do so every class, come rain or snow. We will turn you into robust specimens who can survive your mistakes by running away until your mana replenishes itself.
Chuckles filled the room.
Today?
Johan uttered.
We start running today?
Yes, Johan. Today.
Would have been nice to know.
He muttered, but only in so much as it could still be heard from my seat on high.
And you shall demonstrate the exercises before the class performs them. Then you will do them again with the class.
To my surprise, Johan's response came without delay but was perfectly measured.
Yes, Master Renard.
The elf nodded his approval.
Very good.
He pointed to the door on the left.
Young men will change there.
He pointed to the other.
And young ladies there.
He dropped his hand.
There are sacks in there. Pack your clothes so you can take them with you from the field. There's no need to return here.
Where some might have taken offense at being compared to his elven brethren, I found his words encouraging. Being outside and pushing myself to my physical limits to improve my chances of survival was one thing, but earning the right to fight beside a legendary race about whom my father regaled me with tales from my early childhood? Bring it on. No sign of rain or snow. The cloudless azure sky stretched from the western mountains to the high pines far beyond the low eastern wall. It was time to get sweaty, and I was devoted to the program. If someone would have asked me 3 days earlier if I'd longed for the laborious work of the farm, I'd have responded with a resounding no. But that morning, I knew the tension in my muscles wasn't solely trepidation. I yearned for activity. I'd had none since the duel with Shabana, and I longed for a reason to have an extended soak for sore muscles late that night, after all the others had cleared the queue. Besides, I could have sworn I felt my constitution melting away. Master Renard showed Johan how he could stretch a muscle in his leg by setting it on top of the inner fence that surrounded the campus. He stretched each leg 3 times before we joined and mimicked the motion. As promised, Johan continued to stretch with us. Master Renard seemed to have a sense of humor.
Continue to mouth off, Johan, and you'll end up the most limber of us all.
Johan surprised me again with a willing smile.
Yes, Master Renard. My legs will undoubtedly flap in the wind.
With that little piece of business done, Master Renard pointed to the western fence.
Run.
Most of the students stared back at him, but I took off. The elven girl I'd noticed in the second row also launched without hesitation. Shabana blew past me in seconds. A quick head check revealed Elrin had launched just after us, and Johan lagged just behind. When we'd completed half a lap around the field, Master Renard had crossed down the middle, then joined us. He raised his voice as he filed among us.
When we complete the lap, each of you will quicken or decrease your pace until you balance your stamina meter. For instance, you might find you can reasonably maintain a stamina range of 45 to 55, so aim for those numbers. If you're in better condition and can maintain my pace, you may run with me.
The elven student I'd noticed in my first class took off, sprinting by the rest of the class. Shabana, who'd dropped back to run beside me, smiled and cocked her chin toward the elven female. Sorry, kid. I gotta put this one to the test. I gave my head a dismissive shake and gestured ahead. The Michonne launched into a sprint and left me far behind in seconds. I watched as her tail swayed high and proud behind her until she caught up to the elf. Elrin jogged up next to me to fill in her spot. He spoke between breaths.
I guess those Michonne can really move.
I nodded, my gaze locked on my stamina bar. It had dipped down to 57%, and I wanted to ease into the zone the professor asked for so I could better sustain it. While my muscles were used to hard work, my legs had the heavier build resulting from mountain hiking with my father. Running was not commonplace. They're really fast. Johin moved up to my other side.
They really are. I had no idea they could run like that. Can't say it surprises me exactly.
Don't start your bigot routine, Johin.
I was just picking this morning.
Johin said to me.
I didn't mean to sound like it came off.
Although tempted to ask him why he followed up his bigotry by questioning why non-humans were allowed into the academy, the last thing I wanted my first day in class was conflict. I didn't like the way he treated Shabana, but that didn't mean informing him would affect change in his disposition. So I made better use of my mouth by breathing deep as my stamina dipped below 45%.
Quiet type, huh?
Elrin chuckled. Exhausted type, not used to running. The attribute dropped, then a wave of vertigo tilted the world before me. My mind window popped a warning text. Your stamina has dropped to 30%. I slowed my pace and dropped back from my uninvited running companions. Elrin fell back to continue his run beside me. I might have sighed with exasperation were it not for my low stamina. He fought through a few short breaths before pulling one deep enough to project an even stream of words.
Thanks, Solara. That pace was starting to tax me.
I don't need your sympathy, I chuckled. Just not used to running. Elrin dropped a couple steps back. After a glance at my stamina, I sacrificed my pride and slowed to join him.
I was starting to think you didn't like me, the way you were pacing yourself.
His breaths came in short huffs. I think deeper breaths might help. My stamina just ticked up to 40% and is climbing. He tried to force a deeper breath into his chest, but coughed instead. Then he slowed even more. He waved me off.
Maintain, or Master What's-His-Name might have you out here after sunset.
I nodded and continued ahead. About half a lap later, I peered back to find he'd located his comfortable pace, and I can't say I wasn't happy that at least I wasn't the slowest in the class. In fact, it seemed about 70% lagged behind me, with just a few runners up ahead. But I wasn't so thrilled when Master Reynard, the elven girl, and Shabana lapped us. The latter threw me an enthusiastic wave as they passed, and I didn't see a lick of sweat anywhere on her face. I hated her for it, and mouthed as much. When I glanced back a second time, a white flash surrounded Elrin. He pumped a victorious fist, but then thought better of the added expression of energy when he nearly tripped from exhaustion and returned it to its original pumping motion. Our master called out for a full-on sprint when they'd advanced another half lap ahead of us. The leading trio stopped while the rest of us sprinted around. When I arrived, he waved his hand toward the center of the field.
Go to the middle and sit.
As I jogged toward the center, huffing wildly with the blinking red stamina bar, a white flash surrounded me, then fizzled out. You have gained 1 constitution point, plus 8 stamina. My drop to the grass was less than graceful, but I couldn't have cared less. My chest thumped so hard, the beat reached my throat. I bent my elbows out to my sides and set my palms on my eyes. It proved laborious to force the breaths I needed to recover my stamina, but I was overjoyed at my accomplishment. The bar's red blinking ceased as it ticked up to reflect the increase earned from a single constitution point and the associated stamina. First day of class, 2 advancements? I'd never received a stamina point by running before and wondered if it was because my advancement was limited by the bonding to my father. When I removed my hands, a figure stood near, casting a shadow over me. When I realized it was Master Reynard, I made as if to rise.
No, that's fine. A supine position will help you recover more quickly.
He raised his gaze to survey the class.
Please raise your hand if you gained a stamina point today.
Every hand went up except for the elven student. The elf smiled, then shook his head.
What few requirements humans must ask of their children. Well, at least you saw how easy it can be to gain stamina in the beginning. Did anyone gain a constitution point?
I raised my hand. One other girl raised hers.
Excellent. Our friends here have gained 8 hit points and 8 stamina, almost as if to stack their attributes so they might soundly throttle the rest of you in combat practice the day after tomorrow.
Combat practice?
A young guy asked. He was a frail one, his ribs poked through his thin shirt. I assumed he hadn't been listening in class, but Master Renner didn't point it out.
Don't worry, I'll supervise.
I believed him. He dismissed us, and the frail young man paced over.
Congrats on your constitution point. Only 40 stamina to go.
He threw out a hand, noticed a clump of grass, then rubbed it against the hip of his exercise pants. I shook his hand anyway. Dirt wasn't new to my fingers. Tess of Milbury. He smiled.
Harbin of Milbury.
I stopped in my tracks, balled my hands into fists, then rested them on my hips. Milbury? Really? My eyes traced his form in a blink. What part?
Normiston.
No kidding. We were about 20 minutes south of there by horse. My father traded there all the time.
Small world.
So you farmed? I eyed the thin lines of his arms in doubt. He shook his head.
The outpost there. My father was a commander in the governor's regiments.
My jaw clenched. Ah. The single syllable was clipped. He raised a hand to display his palm.
Before you judge, you should know that's why I'm here. My father and I are very different people. He formed a band of resistors like the ones we heard about in class and set out when the Templars took the governor's seat. Everyone in the outpost went with him. When I refused to go, he abandoned me. I nearly starved.
How did you survive? I doubted the farmers in the area would have sustained the child of an outpost commander. Then again, some were pious and thusly charitable. Anything was possible.
I rode south to Trowsby. The Academy priestess found me there while aiding the elves in defense of the city when the demon scourge invaded from the Plague Barrens to the north. When she realized I had a mana pool and my soul bond to my father had been broken, she told me about this place.
The muscle beneath one corner of his nose twitched.
And if it interests you, I hope to someday cross paths with my father while he's up to no good, so I can teach him the folly of underestimating me.
Good for you. I hope I'm standing next to you when you teach him that lesson. I pointed toward Shabana, who leaned against the inner fence with Johan and Elrin. A few of us are about to meet up. You want to come? He scanned the direction I pointed.
You know, I'm going to beat the crowd for the midday meal. But maybe I'll catch up later and we can regale one another about our lives in Milbury.
Is it Johan? Harbin nodded.
Had a run-in with him a couple days ago. He calls me Strap because I'm thin.
He leaned toward me, then turned his head so he faced the ground. His voice came so low, I strained to hear his words.
I don't know if you have combat skills, but something about the way your Michonne friend carries herself tells me she does. I grew up around soldiers. I know that swagger when I see it. Trust me when I tell you to keep her close by if you're going to keep his kind of company.
A shiver snaked its way up my back. If it hadn't been for Shabana, I might have turned away and followed him to the dining hall. But when I saw her leaning there between two strangers, gaze pasted on me, I knew I had to go. Okay. Well, I'll look forward to our regaling. He bowed.
I'm at your service.
Harbin grabbed the sack with his clothes, then set off. I watched him go, and couldn't help but draw a comparison to our common tidings. We'd both been left to fend for ourselves in the world and ended up here. Perhaps alliances were formed by such similarities.